Welcome to the Natasha Helfer Podcast. To help keep this podcast going, please consider donating at natashahelfer.com and share this episode. To watch the video of this podcast, you can subscribe to Natasha's channel on YouTube and follow her professional page at Natasha Helfer, LCMFT, CST-S. This podcast addresses many topics around mental health and sexuality. It may not be suitable for minors. Some topics may elicit a trigger or emotional response, so please care for yourself accordingly. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or feelings of Natasha Helfer or the Natasha Helfer Podcast. We provide a platform for open and diverse discussions, and it is important to recognize that different perspectives may be shared. We encourage our listeners to engage in critical thinking and form their own opinions. The intro and outro music for these episodes is by Otter Creek. Thank you for listening.
Hello, everybody. This is Natasha Helfer. This is the Natasha Helfer Podcast, where we try to attack shame from all different areas, like especially sexual shame, through stories, through education, through research, through professionals, through people who are just kind of living their day-to-day lives. So that's what we do here. And I am super excited to have Carah Burrell on the show. And I have known her now for several years and excited to see some of the projects she's working on and some of the things that she's willing to talk about and just kind of the role that she's had, especially in the post-Mormon community, which that's kind of where I'm at too with my background. But just to give her a little introduction about Carah, she spent 30 years in the Mormon Church. She's also known as the Nuance Hoe, which is a fun little way that she has marketed herself on social media, which is awesome. And she also spent several years living in the not so Mormon world of stand-up comedy. Both have aided her success in the post-Mormon commentary sphere. So she has a great TikTok page. She co-hosts alongside John Dehlin at Mormon Stories. She was doing that kind of as a full-time gig for a while now. I think you just do it intermittently, if I think that's correct. Contributes to broader dialogues about the challenges and triumphs of leaving religious structures, especially high-demand religion. In September of last year, Carah launched her new project, which is a nonprofit, the Nuance Hug Foundation, and her podcast, The Mormon History Hoedown. So you just have such fun ways of reclaiming some of these words, which is what we're going to be talking about today, is reclaiming female sexuality, right? So she has a passion for history, healing, and post-Mormon community building, and wants to carry on the torch of intellectual curiosity and open-minded exploration mixed in with humor. She's been married for 15 years. She's a daughter of LDS converts and a mom of 3 kiddos. She's not just breaking away from the confines of her past, but is also crafting a narrative of resilience, growth, and empowerment. Welcome to the show, Carah.
Welcome to life. Thank you, Natasha.
Super fun to have you. So let's just dive right in. I would love it if you could share maybe a little bit of your coming up story. And since the theme today is reclaiming our sexualities, maybe as you think about, telling us a little bit about where you come from and what your background was like, and just some of the messages that what were the scripts that were offered you as far as how you should show up sexually, what sexuality is about, what you have to do to be worthy in the sexual department, right? All those kinds of things that so many of us grow up with ideas from other people about our sexuality.
Well, if you're ready to go on a topsy-turvy journey that's a little bit different from, I think, a lot of the messages and ways that people have gone through this Mormon journey, sometimes I feel a little bit unique. And I spent, like I said, 30 years in the church. And a lot of the reasons that I stayed in the church have to do with how I interpreted the God I was worshiping and how I just felt like there's so many people who had these problems with sexuality and the lack of female representation in the church. I just felt like, I get it. Like you guys are just not getting it. And so my journey as a post-Mormon is a lot of going back and giving myself like the permission to feel a little bit more enraged, feel a little bit more, it's hard to say, I don't want to say like a victim, but I started off my life being, trigger warning, being abused for the good portion of up until I was like 7 years old, being sexually abused. And I can talk about that kind of endlessly and how those different inputs of, where I found my worth and how I was expected to do things in kind of a quid pro quo kind of way to be able to survive my early childhood. I can talk about that for a long time and how it impacted me. But overall, I've had to, if we're talking about reclaiming sexuality, a lot of my life as a post-Mormon, I'm 35 next week, from leaving the church at 30 to 35 has been like being able to reparent and go back into the memories of myself as a teenager and developing and having so many mixed, confused feelings and just carving out space and holding space for the child that wasn't able to cry out. So that's me in a nutshell.
So if I'm hearing you right, it sounds like you, when you were in the church and you were hearing some of these complaints, that you would be able to kind of minimize them or say, like, well, that's not how I interpret the gospel. That's not how I see it. That's not my God doesn't work that way. And so you were able to carve out a more sex positive space for you? Or are you saying, actually, I was kind of maybe a little bit deluded in my own ideas about that, and now I'm going back and saying, this is how it was like for me? Explain a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
Yourself.
Yeah, it's weird because it's both. It's something that I feel like I haven't seen a lot with other people, because on one hand, I felt like I had a really bad hand dealt to me with the type of childhood that I had to endure. And that helped me kind of develop what I viewed as a very tight relationship with God, where he allowed me to masturbate. He said, that's fine. This is how you're going to get through life, and just don't, be having sex. Don't disobey the rules of the gospel. Like, I gave you this hard trial, but you're tough enough to endure it, Carah. And if you just lean on me in your dark, depressing moments, you will be able to know that you're loved. And so much of the gospel to me was that you're loved, and just kind of keep your sexuality tightly wound until I give you a righteous priesthood holder after high school. And kind of what happened, what happened. And I got married at 19. So in one hand, it felt like I had a very tight relationship with God. And then on the other, when people would complain into my early like mid 20s, I was extremely conservative. I ran an anti-feminist Twitter page and fought a lot with the Mormon feminists, the progressive feminists on the internet, and thought that, don't you guys understand that you have to just understand this is your role as a woman. This is what God gives us. If you have a tight enough relationship with God, you'll understand what your role is. So I just kind of was on the track that kind of, I guess, brainwashing myself, convincing myself that the ways that I was able to foster this type of relationship with God that kind of only really existed in my mind as a means of coping was the way that gospel just proved itself more and more true to me, because I was so happy. Does that make sense? So I felt like I was dealt a really bad hand. I overcame it. And then everyone else, they just didn't understand their gender roles. They just didn't understand the gospel like I did. And sometimes when you're in very conservative circles and you're only hearing other people kind of tell you and reinforce to you what your role is, you don't have a lot of outside sources to tell you that there's better ways of healing, there's better views of God, there's better views of sexuality. So I had, just for the majority of my life, a very narrow view of who I was and how I was supposed to relate to my sexual desires, who I was, and how I find love, how I find connection, all really reinforced by a lot of my early childhood trauma.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, kudos for young Carah to figure out a way to cope, right, and survive. And sometimes those are not the same ways that help us later on in life. But we have the tools that we have at the time. So you mentioned masturbation. So that is a very normative behavior. It actually does help with stress. It does help with coping. It does help with sleep. It does help with self-soothing. All the things that I can imagine, especially as a victim of abuse, that could be actually a very helpful way to turn inward and soothe yourself and cope with yourself. But yes, to your point, that's not something that we're allowed to do in Mormon land, right? So
Right.
you kind of came up with your own compartmentalization or your own ability to be like, well, but for me, this works and this is actually God approved. So
Yeah.
were you hearing messages as a young woman that masturbation was not okay? Because I know a lot of times in our culture, the messages are fairly gendered. So sometimes only the young men will hear those messages and not so much the young women. Everybody's assuming the young women don't masturbate. What was your experience with what messages you were hearing, especially as you reached puberty and adolescence?
Yeah. First, I think, the corn word, I'll say the corn word so we don't get any trouble if you want to, if I can use that. So I think between like corn and masturbation, unless I should just use the P word. If you want me to just use the P word, I just know how YouTube works sometimes.
No, that's great. Actually,
Okay.
I don't take care of things this way, but see, I'm social media.
The pornography.
Like
Yeah.
issues. Yeah.
I've been demonetized so many times. I have trauma on that. Anyway.
Okay. That's
so
good.
Between those two, I had a lot of like, let's say, that feeling when you just feel broken and you're already just like at God's bottom of his totem pole. And it's just like the messages that the church is giving. Yeah, those are for the people who are going to be like Beehive's president and Laurel's president, which I was at one point. But like, you kind of just are like, nobody else in this class understands that like, I'm already like mucked up. I've already been raped. I've already had horrible. I'm like, I'm not the clean little people that all my other friends are, So the messages felt like those are for them, but my relationship with God, he is giving me this trial, and the ways, that I'm going to interpret these messages are going to be in a way where you can either, it's like, okay, I can either unalive myself, God, or you can give me the permission to do this. And through a lot of prayer, feeling like he's giving me permission to do this. But the messages were still definitely there. I just ignored them on purpose, very consciously, that I knew what I was doing, for instance. So like I started, I love telling these stories almost as just like advice for of like, man, did I find out what to do at like 11 and 12 years old. So I had all kinds of toys that I made around my house. I had all kinds of shower heads. I had, like you said, a very, a way to like relieve stress. And as long as my parents weren't finding out, I felt like this is like these feelings that have been in me, and I'm going through puberty now. I don't know what else you want me to do with this, God. So I swear on my life, is that crazy as it sounds? I feel like since I started going through puberty at 11 years old, there's never been a time where I have like suffocated down my horniness, for lack of a better word, and not masturbated for when it came, because I just have always felt like this is what I do when I'm stressed or want to feel connected to my body or feel connected to another person. And so I've never had that feeling like it's going to need to be snuffed down, that it's a bad thing. And the messages from, for instance, my bishop is actually Elder Oakes's son, who is a professor at BYU. So he's a real serious guy, for instance. But he was my bishop from when I was 12 to 18, my entire life. And no way in hell was I going to tell him, not in my every 6 months interviews, or not in when we do the temple recommend interviews. And there'd be times where he would very directly ask if I masturbated, and I go, no. And in my head, I'd be like, didn't masturbate today. So like, it just felt like I have this connection with God. I'm not going to tell you what I've been through. I don't want to explode this and bring people that I just didn't trust into my personal mind and situation. And it was, regardless of the messages I was getting, that was going to be something that I knew God was going to have to let me do until I made it to the temple and had a husband. So it's a very complicated mix in my mind, but I look back and I'm like, good job, Carah. Like it was hard, and I'm not saying it was easy. It was really hard, and it was stressful at times, but I didn't unalive myself.
I was a masturbator as well. It feels so funny to say that. They're masturbators. And I'm trying to think how I, conceptualize that. Of course, I'm 15 plus years older than you. And I think during my generational space, there really wasn't as much emphasis on giving girls information about pornography or masturbation. I and even, pornography really wasn't as the internet was not around when I was a teenager. And so if we wanted to look at stuff like that, we had to be more intentional or find things that, adults had that we would, sneak into as teens or whatever. But so it wasn't as prevalent. But something you said really stood out to me in the sense of you felt othered in those messages, right? Like you're sitting there in that class of young women and they're talking about sex. And this is what I consistently say as a critique. We talk about sex to the youth like they are all quote unquote pure and virtuous in the moment.
Yeah.
And so let's say even there's kids in there who are consensually exploring and maybe are not, virgins or have done some sexual exploration due to consent. They're already feeling othered. But the piece that's so prevalent to me always is victims of sexual abuse feeling that as well, feeling like I am not that clean, worthy, virtuous person. I've already been quote unquote soiled, or even people will say I've lost my virginity, like implying almost consent when criminal sexual abuse is not any,
literally that's how it was conceived in my mind. I 1000%, I confided in like one friend sort of by maybe in like, I want to say like 4th, 5th grade. And the way that because she also had similar things happen to her. And the way that we talked about it is we didn't want to say what actually happened to us as kids. We literally talked about it as just how we lost our virginity. Like it was effed up. Go on. Yeah.
Right. No, exactly. So you feel like, and there's almost like a sense of responsibility there. Like, this happened to me. And I mean, usually the idea of losing your virginity, which I hate that language anyway, because why are we losing something? Why are we not gaining something when we have our first sexual debuts and our first consensual experiences? But that's not the same thing as having, your sexuality like criminally abused, right? And taken from you. So anyway, my whole point is that as I'm thinking of young Carah in this space, she already was conceptualizing, I'm different. They're treating me like I'm different. They're treating me like sexual abuse doesn't happen in our community. Like I must be the only one, which more than likely you weren't in a group of 10 to 12, young women. There's usually like 2 or 3 young women who are dealing with these kinds of issues in a group of 12 to 15 at least. And so then in your own mind, you're compartmentalizing, well, since I'm other anyway, then I have this capacity to masturbate, even though everybody else doesn't have that. So in a way that was actually really healthy for you to come up with that little exception to the rule. Like I'm already othered, so I'm going to other myself as well. Yeah. But this is one of my concerns with church messaging is that all the kids are being treated like they just have zero sexual experience, which is not the case at all. Anyway.
Yeah. And just a lot of people who wouldn't, like my parents, even though I love them and I wouldn't want to, disparage any of the choices that they made, but like I didn't go to therapy or like anything. And just people who don't want to talk about that kind of stuff that we see with the church so often, they want to sweep it under the rug. And the last thing that's really on their minds is like, holy shit, we have a victim here who like is going to have complex trauma for the rest of their life. We don't know. Let's just not ignore that. So
yeah, we ignore all that stuff for sure. Kenley on the comments is saying nothing can compare to that feeling, the need to lie about things that that is nobody's business to begin with. Hashtag masturbation. So I think that's totally true. So when do things start? You're talking about you're kind of like double down. You're very invested in kind of this idea of God you've created, of this idea that if people could just get behind the right kind of gospel, they would understand. And these things that people are complaining about would make sense. When does that start cracking for you? When do you start questioning your own worldview?
Well, if you want to flash forward to when I lost my faith in the church. So, I lost my faith in the church on July 12th, 2019. I had a big, long kind of Jesus freak phase that I talk about a lot. So I was not connecting with the messages of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints itself. I was listening to a lot of sermons and reading the New Testament, and I had a much more Christ-centered faith and very, very conservative at the time. And I was working for a very conservative nonprofit. And all of my ideas about gender, sexuality were not just very like Christian, like evangelical Christian infused, but also like that political right-wing infusion too. So you put those two together and you have a very like orthodox dogmatic view of how people should behave, what makes a healthy society, and how I should show up in that society with very little gray areas. And that's why, for instance, once I lost my faith in the church and started to deconstruct that, I immediately wanted to be called the nuanceau because I was like, I want to be very nuanced. And I also want to put the word hoe at the end so no one takes me too seriously. But I wanted to be in an area of like dialogue and understanding where people are coming from. I never wanted to be so dogmatic again. So after I lost my faith, I had to not just deconstruct, yes, all of those messages of this being the one true church, and then deconstruct what I believed about Jesus Christ, and then deconstruct what I thought about everything to do with proper, healthy sexuality and relationships. Like I said, the nonprofit that I was working for, it's like a very family-centered nonprofit. There's some really, really bad ones out there that are like the focus on the family ones, and the ones that are like the most insanely homophobic. Of all of the spectrum, I feel like the one that I worked for was the best of the very conservative nonprofits that had family values. But things about monogamy and children's rights and what divorce looks like when you marry somebody under the confines of one system and how you grow as that person. So I had, over the last 4 years, I've had a lot to really look at and take apart. And like I said, the church, Christianity, my conservatism, and then the last piece has been my sexuality. And in some parts, that's one of the funnest ones. I feel like I do my best thinking and processing and meditation during sex. And so I do it a lot. I'm like, I need to meditate. Let's go, Erin. But I would say over the last, since I left the church, those are all those big major kind of Rubik's cubes you have to take apart and look at of what you really believe. And with your help, Natasha, you've given me lots of things to think about with all of the people that I've talked to on Mormon Stories, just giving a lot of things to think about and what actually what I believe and what this whole thing up here can be a big, messy, tangled web. And so kind of taking those threads out and saying, what do I think about this piece? Like, what do I think about my heterosexuality? What do I think about monogamy? What do I think about, like my connection to my husband sexually? What do I think about, rattle off 20 different items that kind of come up, and how can I love sex. So I couldn't wait to get married. I couldn't wait to have this bond with my husband. We married for 15 years. So all of those things are just, how do we better improve our connection? And that's been the journey for the last couple of years.
Yeah. Well, as much as you're comfortable with, you can always tell me I'm not comfortable with that question, which is fine. We'll role model good boundaries here. But so a lot of times a very classic story, especially amongst women who grow up in conservative religious faiths, is that they in some ways look forward to sex, right? Because it's been kind of posited as this special and sacred and beautiful way that you will share yourself with the right person at the right time in the right place. So there can be kind of this like kind of lovey romanticized version of sexuality that I think a lot of people look forward to. But then when they're dealing with the mechanics of it and the first experiences, and oftentimes with a lot of miseducation and misinformation, honeymoon, especially if you've waited until your honeymoon to have your first sexual encounter, it doesn't always go really great. A lot of women kind of will talk about it felt like a duty or an obligation. It became kind of husband-centric. It sounds like for you, that wasn't necessarily the case, that you entered this space of marriage. And I don't know if this was your first consensual sexual experience or not, but that it was a fairly positive part of your marriage. How comfortable are you talking about some of those things?
Yeah. again, this is one of those things where I hope that as much as, I know those same kinds of stories, and I've been in Facebook groups, even when I was Mormon, hearing about all kinds of different sexual dysfunction. And my heart goes out to people who are in that situation and trying to understand and empathize the system of Mormonism itself that kind of leads to that. But that wasn't my experience because, for one, I grew up with very like feminist leaders in my young women's thing. And so I was very familiar with sex and the mechanics. And sometimes, yeah, there's very conservative families and like you never know anything and they don't even know what hole it goes in. That's not my experience with me and my little Mormon girlfriends in Provo, Utah, is that we had a lot of conversations and knew exactly what we wanted to do. We just knew that we were going to wait and put that off until we found our returned missionary, righteous priesthood holder and stuff. So one of those young teen girls with me, my friends' moms. So the conversations were always really there. And I knew exactly kind of what I needed and what was going on. And like I said, I was very familiar with how to get myself an orgasm already. And the last piece, though, is I did not know once my husband and I would come together on our wedding night, how my body would work with trying to like have an orgasm and have like a pleasurable sexual experience with intercourse versus just clitoral stimulation, right? So I was like, that's going to be a big surprise. We'll see how that works, And what's the rate? It's like what, 30% or less can orgasm from just penetration. Is that something like that, right? Yeah. And so I knew that statistic going in. So I was like, oh, it's going to be a big surprise. We'll have to see. But the messages overall from the church, like, there's the healthy ones of like, sorry, I can't think of any healthy ones off the top of my head, but I felt like I was going in with that this person, he's not going to have this ownership over me. It was a true like, we're cleaving unto each other and a real beautiful bond of what you would hope just your standard, like, heterosexual marriage would be entering into with a lot of love and respect. And so my husband and I, so it was my first consensual sexual experience at 19. We got married. He was 26, his as well, and just absolutely head over heels in love with each other. Tons of respect for each other. I have an episode I did on my YouTube channel with my friend Alyssa couple weeks ago where I'm wearing this shirt too. And I talk a lot about these same kinds of stories where my abuse and things like that, it made me just really want to fulfill my promises to God that I wasn't going to break any of these rules and I could hold everything really tight until it was time to let it all go with my husband and stuff. And so I felt like I was very mentally and physically prepared to enter into the honeymoon. Like I said, my friends and I, we talked about what we were going to wear on our honeymoon. All my little girlfriends, they already knew the outfit I picked out and everything. Like it was a big, happy, celebrated time to like have your high school group of friends, and we're all getting to marry our return missionaries and go have sexual experiences and come back and have sleepovers and talk about them. So it was a really happy, exciting time, and the mechanics and everything went off without a hitch, pretty much. So I can tell you some of the things I learned right away that I didn't realize. For instance, I knew about lubricant. I knew about things like that. I just didn't know that you can have too much sex on your honeymoon. So it was kind of like, once you have that free reign. So there was a time where we had sex like 5 times in one day. And then I like broke my vagina after that. And last thing I wanted to do was come home from my honeymoon and have to tell my mom that I like am Ariana Grande walking side to side. And I didn't want to tell her that, but I was in so much pain. I ended up having to tell my mom. And funny story, sitting on the computer, she's opening up, there's a picture of like a diagram of a vagina right there on her computer screen. And she's like trying to figure out like what the problem could be, and then super awkward. This is going to sound really, really bad, but it's funny in my mind. So my oldest brother, he's the one who sexually assaulted me for most of my life. And I'm fine with him. He has autism and he's deaf, and he is his own person who's made his own choices, and he's had a hard life in and of himself. So I'm fine with him. He's just a funny guy. And he walks in and he sees me and my mom. He knows I just got home from my honeymoon. He sees this vagina. He puts 2 and 2 together and he's like, what's going on here? And I'm like, get out, get out. And it was just, why is this happening to me? So that's my kind of, it's anyway. So I felt like I broke my vagina and I did not know a lot of things about there can be too much sex, for instance. There can be, you can think you have enough lubrication, you cannot. And overall, my husband has been amazing and respectful and meeting me at the levels of horniness that a girl needs to be met at. So we've had a fantastic 15 years. And the only thing is then once you leave the church, you're like, well, there are a couple things I've repressed. Should we unpack those together? And then unpacking those together and doing it with a lot of honesty and communication as we move forward. So
yeah, no, that's great. I really love hearing actually the positive stories, right? Not just the negative ones, because I think the negative ones are really important to tell because they, I think, raise awareness of what's happening within our community. I think the positive stories give a lot of permission for people to recognize, oh, wait, this is happening within our community. Like people are talking and friends are talking and young women's leaders are progressive and actually giving information about sex. And sometimes that can give permission for people to be like, I can be part of this community and we can have this kind of an experience instead of, always the negative experiences. Because like even right now, there's somebody sharing, Deborah on the Facebook feed is saying a friend of mine said she felt like she was raped by her husband the first time they had sex after being married. What could I say to help her work through that? Right. And so I think, and why people feel that way, is it because they're just not prepared? Is it because there's entitlement? Is it because, they rushed through a process that they didn't know needs some kind of developmental steps? Right. And so that can be really difficult. I think too, what is really, I guess I'll just ask you, do you think, and I think you kind of already answered this, do you think that the fact that you masturbated and that you were in touch with your own body and your own pleasure helped you make that transition into marital sexuality more easily?
Yeah. So I just had on my podcast Callie Crofts from this band Die Shiny, and she has this new song Sacrament that we were exploring, and the lyrics of it are so profound. And she talks about how I never was told that my body was mine. And today I touched my skin and all of those things. For me, I relate to so many of these different issues that are such pain points within, Mormon and religious thought, that are just so ingrained in us that this body is not my own. And because I had to, from such a young age, so proactively be in touch with my relationship with God, my spirituality, and my body. That's like a big three that I was very, very, like I said, conscious of what I was doing through my sexual development, because it kind of life or death, heaven or hell. And I had to really think through what I was doing. And so that's one thing that I had to very proactively work through was my connection to my body that nobody else could take away from me, because I'd say that's the general theme of my entire adulthood and my life, is only sharing my body with people that I feel comfortable with, and really putting up boundaries where those were so violated, where I know what it feels like to have that violated and I know what it feels like when it doesn't. I'm gonna put this super bluntly, probably more bluntly than I've ever put it. I'm gonna start crying for a second. Okay. So, there's different instances in our life where we get taken advantage of, sexually or otherwise. And you think, oh my gosh, I know. Now that I know better, I'll do better. But man, I wish I would have known this at that time. And so I didn't have to go through this trauma and this experience. That's been the main thing on my mind, that's the attitude I had for a lot of my development teen years, a lot of my life, thinking of myself as a 2-year-old, thinking of myself as a 7-year-old, of you should have known better. It's working through that of you didn't know any better. You didn't know any better. It's like a quid pro quo kind of situation. And so for some reason, I feel like I'm every age of my mind all at the same time. I can feel, I know what it's like to remember to be a 2-year-old. I know what it's like to be a 7-year-old. I feel like I'm always in that same stage. So working through whether I'm 2 years old or 34 years old, constantly having to work through and carve out that space of you didn't know any better. And now that you know better, how can you carve out this space to reparent and to feel comfortable and calm with things that were done to you and not for you? And so with all of that being said, to answer your question about the development with my body, I've had to really be in touch with that those things happened to me and I was not participating in them. And even though you want to be like, you should have known better, you should have known better, I feel like that darkness, that thought, those things can creep in at any age, and it's very hard to get rid of them. And so by being able to take back my body and feel comfortable in my body, it's a way for me to say, like, a lot of these things have been filling me with shame. Shame is a big word that has a lot to unpack there, but just basically a lot of things that have filled me with a you should have known better type of attitude, and being like, this is just me showing up without any of this other removal of my autonomy, chipping away at who I am, that I still can come as a whole person. I'm not an incomplete person from what has happened to me. I'm not an incomplete person as what has happened to me in my 20s or 30s either.
Yeah, I love so much of what you're talking about. I mean, I think a lot of times when we think about reclaiming female sexuality, we're thinking about, oh, we need to reclaim it from these messages like, male-centric messages or worthiness messages. But you're bringing in a really important part, which is trauma, right? Reclaiming our sexuality when we've been through trauma. And a lot of times, one of the complaints I hear from people who have done good trauma work, even with therapists and all that, is that it doesn't always enter the realm of sexuality. It's like, okay, I've done all this trauma work, but now what do I do about my sexual self, right? And how do I reclaim that? And so I think what you're talking about is super important in the whole umbrella of reclaiming sexuality, right? Because we're reclaiming so many things, our bodies, we're reclaiming trauma, we're reclaiming messages, we're reclaiming cultural aspects. Yeah, super, super important. And
it sounds complicated, but people out there, you can work on it day by day. There's always little things that can always be worked on and holding space for.
Right, exactly. And I love this idea too, that, thinking of yourself at different ages, Trevor says, I feel that being all ages of myself. And I think a lot of us do. I think a lot of us, I mean, if you think about it, when you have a birthday, right? When did you start realizing, oh, a birthday is just kind of like any other day. I don't feel that different. I'm now
never.
10. No, 10. I was 9 yesterday.
Yeah.
Am I that different? And so you can be 45 and still not feel that different from your 5-year-old self that went through trauma. And then you hold yourself accountable like you would your 45-year-old self to that 5-year-old self, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot of the messages you're talking about, if I should have known, or if I would have known better, or if I would have had more boundaries, or if I could have said something, and you're like, you were 5, you were 12, even you were 17, like you were not fully developed, right? And you didn't have those skills just come naturally to you. So yeah, I love that you're bringing that up. Okay, switching gears a little bit. So you're talking about you and your husband having, a pretty good sex life, and you're moving along and you're getting a faith transition going, and you're starting to rethink a lot of things. And so I think people might be curious, okay, if you're having an okay sex life, what do you need to deconstruct? What do you need to reclaim? Like, it's working, it's going well. And I don't think it's that simple, right? And so I think, like you're saying, like we're having to revisit structures and ideas and scripts. Right. So what do you think some of the scripts were? And maybe this is too complicated of a question, but just what comes to mind for you, like the scripts that you had in your marriage, whether they were gender scripts or how you show up sexually or what kind of sex you should be having, or, what does sex even mean, between us, versus maybe some of the scripts that you are exploring now.
Yeah. So I'll start with some of the good ones, if I can put my mind back into how our Mormon marriage was. We got married when I was 19. I left the church when I was like 29, 30. So it's 10 or 11 years of my life. I'll say 10 years of, honestly, yeah, very healthy attitudes overall. And the gender scripts of, there's submissive and dom, things like that, obviously, which I don't mind as a mostly heterosexual woman. So things that are that within our Mormon marriage, you know, there's certain things that are just off, that are not allowed whatsoever, and wasn't a big deal. So like pornography, I don't think either of us really looked at it except for maybe like once or twice, but it wasn't a big deal. We told each other and we were just like, let's try to do better, whatever. But we were free to masturbate. We totally were fine with if the other person masturbated when the other person wasn't around, or if we were in different living on vacation or on different cities and things, and could send each other photos and things and phone sex and anything that we felt like. And so whatever the messages were that could have been, you know, given to us and put in our ear holes from the church, we definitely didn't listen, and we definitely didn't care for the most part. You know, there's some people who say, obviously, there's no masturbation whatsoever, even if you're married, and that's completely off. Your sexuality is in the other person's hands. That's the only way that you can express those things. And we're like, that's not going to work. I think me and Aaron are 10 out of 10 high sex drive people. And we're just like, so you just we'll just leave the church if you expect us to do that. Like, we can't live within that. That's just not going to happen. So that was kind of never on the table. But Aaron and I know this sounds ridiculous. I'm going to also give a real big overshare as well here is I never felt like duty sex whatsoever. We just have had an amazing connection. And it's one of those things where, it's a bonding moment. It's a stress reliever. It's a horniness reliever. It's an everything. So it's our favorite activity since the day we got married till probably today, to just before we go to bed, put away our stuff and just snuggle and talk and get frisky. And we've always been able to have very connective and very like loving lovemaking. And it's been like that for a good 15 years. The more unhealthy things I think that I could have probably corrected was the times of duty, like the rare instances where I wouldn't even blame this on Mormonism whatsoever. I would just blame this on like, it's a routine. And if you break the routine, it's like, well, why? Did I do something wrong? Just be like, can I just say no? And that's a complete sentence. And then being like, well, and then a lot of talking, and then some boundaries sometimes being crossed on very, very rare occasions, you know. But for the most part, unless you can give me some more things that I can tell you within my Mormon mind of how our sexuality was constructed. But that's, for the most part, I feel like it was pretty healthy and connective and everything we kind of would want it to be within that confines of Mormonism. But if you want to give me some more ideas of what other people struggle with in that space, so I can think of it.
Well, and I think first of all, I just want to point out that if you identify as a woman, especially coming from a high demand religion, I'm hoping that just listening to women talk about sex is also part of your reclaiming. So I'm just saying that to the audience. So I think it's healthy to listen to people that represent you talk about something that goes well, which is why I oftentimes try to say things like, hey, I did masturbate from the age of 2 to 3 years, as long as I can remember. You know, I did have premarital sexual encounters that were actually very consensual and very pleasurable, even though I wasn't really allowed to think of them that way when I was, when I was in the Mormon kind of construct. I also have a higher drive and really enjoyed sex throughout my marriage, or throughout my long-term partnerships. But you're talking about drive, right? And this is a thing, like people come with different drives. And sometimes we do get partnered with people who have similar drives to us. And sometimes we partner with people that have very different sexual drives. And this is not something that we've been taught to even think about talking about before we get married, especially in, religious circles. It's kind of like, well, are we compatible because we love each other and we love the Lord, right? It's kind of like those are the areas of compatibility that we're taught to think about. And so people can get matched with folks that are very non-sexually compatible. So on the one hand, I want people to feel like, oh, this is kind of cool to listen to women talk about their sexual drives. On the other hand, I don't want people to feel shame because maybe your drive doesn't match Carah's and my drive, right? That's okay. We all come from different things. The other thing that's complex is that drive gets interrupted by artificial things like messages and scripts. And so you have, we have our biological drive, but then we also have like our cultural drives and our scripts that affect our physiology. So that can be tricky to figure out. If somebody's listening, they can be like, well, do I not want to have as much sex as Carah because I just don't come wired in the same way as Carah? Or do I not want to have as much sex as Carah because certain messages or cultural norms and expectations got in the way of me being able to enjoy my sexuality? And this is, I think, a question that's really good to just explore for a long time, right? It doesn't have a simple answer. And this is what I do a lot in therapy and coaching sessions with folks, right? So, but yeah, I think some of the things that people struggle with is the duty, is the inability to maybe find stimulation that works for us. You know, you mentioned that maybe you looked at pornography a few times, or which I'm not saying pornography is the only way to get stimulated. It's one out of many ways, but many of those ways are kind of seen as not holy or not righteous. And so when you're thinking that the only way I can express myself sexually is kind of in this romantic love narrative, when many of us are kinky or like different domination type play,
Totally.
or, enjoy fantasy, we're not really allowed to tap into that without feeling maybe inadequate or unworthy. So that can interrupt our freedom to be sexual with another person. So I think that's a theme that comes up a lot. I think, again, the structure of monogamy. And like you were saying, it's like my entire sexual self has to be contained to just what's happening between me and you. It can't even be about what's happening between me and me, which it sounds like you and your husband decided that wasn't going to work and you made your own authority around that. But I think some couples struggle with that, right? So I think those are some of the basic themes and scripts that sometimes folks navigating marital sexuality in a religious structure still don't have a lot of freedom. I remember getting a lot of questions like, is oral sex okay? Is anal sex okay? We're still outsourcing our sexual consent to external authority instead of figuring out what works for me and what works for my partner.
Yeah. In addition to all of that, what you said, which is all genius and so important for people to think of, and things that I have had to bring up in my own mind and think about a lot. I also count myself, again, really lucky that as a woman, it can be difficult for a lot of people to figure out how to orgasm, especially, again, with all those messages, not really knowing and being in touch with their bodies and or how to stimulate themselves or their partner stimulating them and to reach that kind of climax. But again, I feel like with all of the things that I've mentioned thus far, I'm just count myself very fortunate that I have been able to kind of hack my way through a lot of those false messages and be in tune with my body enough to pursue my own pleasure while I was Mormon from the very get-go. So my marriage started on day one with both of us are able to orgasm with each other anytime that we want to. Why would we do anything else? So I feel very lucky that we knew how to have the type of sex that we wanted. Other people can have the type of sex that they want. Like we've talked about before in other videos we've made, is, sometimes it's the journey, not the destination. So, but still being able to have that ability and know where I could go, knowing how we could come together in the simplest terms. Starting as a, Mormon virgin at 19 and having that, to be honest, is one of the best reasons for our marriage being as healthy as it is, because with two people who we love each other a lot, we don't want to fight. We don't want to be misunderstood. We don't want to misunderstand each other. How can I understand you? And how can we get this financial problem or kid problem? How can we get our problem solved and put down all of our egos and communicate well so that at the end of the night, we can go do that thing that we love doing and it will not feel like it's unauthentic for either of us. So I feel like it's one of our reasons our sex life and also our marriage is so healthy, is when you have a season pass to Disneyland, you're just going to go do it in simplest terms. So
I love it. All right. Well, so I guess, as we're wrapping up today, I'd love to hear maybe, 2 or 3 things that you're like, yep, this was a message or a rule or a construct that I have really enjoyed unpacking. And maybe this is the result of that unpacking, again, as much as you're comfortable sharing details, right? So,
Okay, so let's start with one of the big ones. People in all kinds of post-religious spaces are told one story about gender roles and sexuality, sexual orientation, and the sin therein that lies therein if they divert from that heterosexuality. And so you obviously know a lot of people growing up who are very obviously can only live one way, and then so many people come out as, you know, bisexual, and they explore these different things that their brain has never really allowed them to think of. And so because I have such a high sex drive towards like my husband and to men generally, and one of my favorite jokes you're going to hear me say, really get inside Carah's mind here for a second, is if I have the type of sexuality that almost feels very like how men talk about women and the way that my mind works. I feel like the ways that when a woman walks down the street and she has like cleavage showing or something, and the guys are like, whew, if that was like men with sweatpants, I would probably feel like, wow, okay, I have that kind of attraction towards male genitalia, generally speaking, but I am monogamous with my husband. Okay. And so when I already knew that going in, I'm like, what is my attraction to women? I don't know if I should be exploring this. And so the message is about, you know, not only is it a sin and it's something that people go through all kinds of horrendous conversion therapy for, and never feeling like, you know, it's just such a big deal for the people who live it. And then they leave the church over it. And it's such a gigantic, you know, trial for some people. And then they're able to fully embrace that. And that's just who they are, and not feeling like I really identify as anything there on that kind of LGBTQ spectrum. But of course, as any old girl does, when you do enough mushrooms, sometimes you're able to go into places of your brain and really think through how you feel about things that you didn't even realize that you would have shame around. And it's a really complicated, long subject. And but I definitely am like very, very happy with the ways that I have been able to detangle what I even thought about queerness, and be able to at least mentally experiment and really think through times in my life and relationships with women that I've had. And like, Carah, let's go back into that. Like, what was really coming up for you? What was really coming up for you? And one of my happiest top 5 epiphanies that I've ever had since leaving the church was probably on mushrooms, thinking of the ways that I view men is I kind of view them as like enticing and interesting, and like they're the other, like, oh my gosh, like, you know, there's the cat and the mouse, and there's the seduction, there's this whole there's a whole thing, men and women. I view men as like the other species that is very interesting in a subdom kind of interaction. And then I view women as just like home. And sometimes you want to be home. Sometimes you want to be out in the wild. And then sometimes you just want to be home. So that's how I view women now. And I had a few far in between since I was even in the church, with like semi-sexual, semi-moderate relationships with women. But I still would have so much shame, even in a monogamous heterosexual relationship right now. I don't know how that would progress in the future, but at least being able to just do some mushrooms, take off a lot of this conditioning, and just being like, what do you really think about all those relationships, Carah? Take away the shame for a second. Take away the fact that, like, you know, you're not just like a full sail, you know, like born lesbian. So what do you actually think about these things? And that's, like I said, some of the best things come into my mind when I'm meditating or when I'm having sex, and I'm able to really like get deep into my brain and think, who am I really without all of these other conditionings? So that's a big one.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of gender roles and also attraction kind of baked into one. Like, should I explore my attraction? Can I notice my attractions and still be monogamous? Like you said, just because I notice, people I'm attracted to, or, certain genitalia or certain parts of a body that sometimes we see this as infidelity in kind of like more conservative spaces, but being able to give yourself permission to say, I can notice things. I can notice my attractions. I can notice how they generate for me. I can notice what gender roles are kind of scripted, but then also maybe I still enjoy them, like the gender wars between men and women can also be quite erotic. So sometimes we feel, I think, almost guilty, like, I'm a feminist, I shouldn't have these types of erotic ideas of being submissive or whatever. But on the other hand, it's like, no, these are erotic templates, right? And do I enjoy them or not?
Erotic templates. So I've taken that test. Have you ever taken the BDSM test? My friend sent it to me the other day. It was funny. I was at Allison Schiffler's house, if you know her, another ex-Mormon therapist, and me and a bunch of my friends took this BDSM test, which was hilarious. And I mean, very detailed, low on all the typical BDSM stuff, but very high on the all of the very, I would say, typically feminine girly ones of submissive, oh no, run away, just Princess Peach with Mario in the tower, don't chase me. So it's really fun to take those kinds of tests and take them throughout. So I've taken it twice in the last year, and just how kind of things change. You're like, oh, I didn't realize I should consider these questions and stuff. And so there's there's literally no right, wrong answer with any of this kind of stuff. Consent is just the top, biggest, most important thing to me in the entire world. I've been in so many situations where I felt consent was the last thing on people's minds. And I just want to always forward the ideas of what consent really means to you and means to the people around you. And don't just put the excitement of the sexual play at the forefront of your minds without understanding how trauma can then inform that fun sexual experience. So that's how I kind of view things with what I see in the ex-Mormon space, is that we don't understand consent a lot, but all of these questions and things all need to rise to the surface and be investigated, how you actually feel about them. And we all probably will come out differently. And that's beautiful and fine.
Yeah, I love that. I love your acknowledgement that anything goes as long as there's consent, right? And there's no right or wrong. There's no healthy or unhealthy necessarily, right? And then also that things can shift. I know one of our listeners, Kelly, said, and that can be phases that come and go. And so yes, that these things shift. We're fluid. We're sexually fluid. We're not sexually stagnant. And as people give themselves permission, I think some of this was you giving yourself permission to ask some of these questions and to explore them and see how they would kind of suss out for you, you start noticing shifts and changes that can happen right in that moment or months or years from that moment. So it's kind of exciting. All right. Before we totally run out of time, do you have one more thing that you'd like to put out there as far as another thing that you've deconstructed or given yourself out?
So I would love to just one of these days out there in the future. Yes. Lot of little gay Carah thoughts have come up, and one day in the future, maybe they will manifest, but it's not on my front burner right now. Just gotta get through life and raise my kids and do what I gotta do. So that's just there, and I feel happy about it, and that's fine. But the other probably big one is, I guess, there's so much to do with revealing my body, I guess, and pornography in general. So I had a discussion with a friend a couple months ago, and for instance, I really like wearing bikinis. I used to be so conservative in my mind, be like, why would I ever wear my underwear in public? And then mostly I just want to start tanning my skin. And then as I started to feel, once I took off my garments and thinking about what's really coming up for me. And one of the biggest ones is, what's ironic, is the one that I feel like my mom also puts on me, is just a lot of internalized slut shaming of girls who dress like this, they participate in that activity, and the activities they participate in is going to be the downfall of society. You know what I mean? It's literally like my mom, I walked in the summer wearing a tank top, and she's like, Carah, you look like a slut. Said that right to my face. And I go, okay, what's the problem with looking like a slut? She's like, then your kids will dress like sluts. I was like, what's the problem with my kids dressing like sluts? Then they're going to grow up to have sex, and then they're going to grow up to blah, blah, blah. And she like had this whole tale. And I was like, okay, that's not true, but that's the narrative of what she was thinking in her mind. And those are things that I've had to also think through of like, what do I think about people who dress in certain ways and what they wear? And from my conservative upbringing, it's like this idea that yeah, your worth, you can tell a lot about somebody by what they wear and what they're going to be willing to do. And those messages are constantly kind of ingrained. And sometimes, obviously, like men will go after in a club, like, you know, the woman who looks like they'll go home with him that night based on what she's wearing, right? And so I was groped when I was 19 at this club that I was visiting, and I was wearing literally like pretty much no clothes. For being a Mormon, I was off the deep end for one summer at summer camp, and I was wearing a bikini top and short shorts with my friends, and we all dressed like Twiggy, and we all had paint all over our bodies. But it was the only time that I'd gone to this club 10 times, and it was the only time where I just got like groped and molested everywhere that I went. And that, for my Mormon mind, told me that like the way you dress, men are going to expect something from you the way you dress. And so I've had to deconstruct just like showing more of my body and feeling comfortable that people are going to have thoughts about me, and that's going to be in their head, and it's not really for me to care about. And most of the ways that we dress are just neutral. They're just neutral. It's just somebody showing parts of their skin that have been informed by a lot of social conditioning and sexuality that have all coming up for people. And so something that's just been fun is just taking more pictures of myself to post on like my Patreon. I call it the butt buffet. And I'm like, people are like, yay, we love when you post those pictures, Carah. Awesome. But it's also really fun for me to like experiment with how comfortable I feel being seen sexually, which, as much as I enjoyed sex and talked about sex, and as you can tell, my biggest problem, I think, in my youth to my Mormonism into just very recently, is I really truly, you're not going to believe me, you're going to think I'm lying, I really truly do not like being thought of as a sexual person. To people, at least, who don't know me, I don't like people viewing my body and knowing that they have sexual thoughts of me. I don't know if that's just from my Mormon upbringing or my abuse. So I've had to just work through owning my body, feeling comfortable with what I'm wearing, knowing that if I talk about sex or I dress in a sexier manner, just letting people have the thoughts they're going to have and feeling comfortable that I'm doing this. It's coming from like a healing, happy place. And overall, I don't need to be too concerned. But it's been a real struggle. That's probably my number one struggle, is being okay with people viewing me sexually.
Yeah.
I know my last name is Ho already. I know I did that to myself, but it was really a joke, I swear.
Well, but that's a reclaiming too, right? This derogatory term that, again, is usually very female centric. We don't usually call men sluts and whores. And I mean, sometimes the man whore type of fun verbiage, but it's not usually used in the same way that has been used to monitor female sexuality in such a profound way in our culture. So I love that you brought this body stuff up, and even this last thing that you're talking about, where it's almost like we're supposed to be compartmentalized, like my sexual self can only come out and be seen when I'm, in this space with my quote unquote heterosexual.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the time it's supposed to be divorced, from me, that the people are not supposed to figure out that I'm sexual.
And may I add, I've also had 3 kids, and where you just kind of give up, you've had kids, you've got your stretch marks, you're like, I am just a frumpy housewife, nobody look at me. And like, just, that's not fair. Like, I can still dress how I want. And but go on.
No, and that's true too. Like, only certain bodies can dress a certain way, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Look a certain way. To be even considered sexual by the culture or whatever. Whereas why does that matter? Why can't all bodies, sizes, disabilities, whatever it is, show up in a way that feels sensual and sexual to them? Mm-hmm. So yeah, and you're even kind of getting into like objectification, like people will objectify you or whatever. But at the end of the day, we are all objects. We are objects, and we respond to other objects, right? And so not that we want to objectify, because that means that you ignore the person that is in the body.
I just block those DMs. Yeah, I can tell which ones are objectified.
Right. But at the same time, it's completely unrealistic to think that we're not going to have reactions to other bodies and other people and how we show up in these spaces. So I love that you're figuring that out in a way that is, like you said, healing and helpful for you. All right. That is the time that we have for today. I'd love for you, Carah, to just share a little bit about like, where can people find you? How can people, I know you have an Instagram and a TikTok. Can you share a little bit about what you're doing and how people can find you if they're interested in more Carah?
I hope if you want more Carah, well, thank you again, Natasha, for having me on. And Natasha's going to come over later and do an episode with me. So it's so cool to have friends like you that are so knowledgeable and ask good questions and doing good work in this space that I also continue to hope to do. So like you mentioned in my intro, I started a 501c nonprofit called the Nuance Hug Foundation. So I have a podcast, The Mormon History Hoedown, that's available wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify or Apple, wherever. My YouTube channel, Nuance Ho, I put out videos multi times a week now. So it's like my full-time job in that space doing stuff. So in all of my YouTube videos, I link my email if you need to contact me for anything, thenuanceho@gmail.com. And you can also reach out on Instagram and TikTok at nuanceho. So that's the main places you can find me. So I'd love to connect.
We'll make sure to link to all of that, both in these threads and also on the webpage of the podcast as well. And then I just wanted to make sure people knew that. So I'm starting my next Reclaiming Female Sexuality group on February 9th. So it's a 7-week online group. You can join me from anywhere in the world. It's an educational group versus a therapy group. So we can do things all, across state lines and all of that. And then the other exciting thing that's going to be happening for people who want more resources and spaces to kind of do some of this work on your own is April 20th. We are going to have a Reclaiming Female Sexuality kind of event. And Carah Burrell is going to be one of our presenters, as well as Kristen Hodson, who's an amazing sex therapist colleague of mine, and also Carrie Cox, who will be coming in and doing some body work, like through, kind of like self-massage and just thinking about our body. She's a professional masseuse. So that's going to be kind of exciting to do all of that. And we'll put up the registration for that. We do have limited space and we're expecting it to fill up. So get your tickets soon. And that will be held here in the Salt Lake City area in Ogden, for those of you who are either close by or want to travel to have a pretty cool event around many of these issues and how you can start healing and doing the work for yourself. So
let's sell it out. Yeah.
Do it. So super excited. And anyway, but thank you so much, Carah, for your time today. And yes, I'll be at your place later this afternoon. So we'll keep the party going.
Yay.
Sounds good.
So good.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Natasha Helfer Podcast. To help keep this podcast going, please consider donating at natashahelfer.com and share this episode. To watch the video of this podcast, you can subscribe to Natasha's channel on YouTube and follow her professional page at Natasha Helfer, LCMFT, CST-S. You can find all her cool resources at natashahelfer.com. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or feelings of Natasha Helfer or the Natasha Helfer Podcast. We provide a platform for open and diverse discussions, and it is important to recognize that different perspectives may be shared. We encourage our listeners to engage in critical thinking and form their own opinions. The intro and outro music for these episodes are by Otter Creek. Thank you for listening.
There is a place where time slows to nature's pace, and there is space there to find yourself in her embrace. Some places should be left alone. Namo tishkish say the Namo, so we can always go to the homeland of the heart. should be left alone. Nahotish kishay so we can always go to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart. Deep in our cities, we sleep without her stars, yet still her presence sustains us from afar. Some places should be left alone. Nahotish so we can always go to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart.